Hello everyone and welcome back. In the last couple of lessons we have prepared our store solution to handle a new type of entity, the lesson entity. So we have set up the NGRX entity adapter and we have set up here the skeleton of a reducer. We have everything in place to start loading lessons into our application. So let's go ahead and do that. We are going to now load the first page of lessons into our course landing page component, which is this course.component.ts file that we have here opened. The component contains here an initial skeleton implementation. You can see here that the course that contains here the title and the thumbnail of the selected course is coming here from the router via a data resolver. So this is already in place, so we only need to take care of loading the lessons, filling in this data table here with some data. Now this data table, if we head over here to our course component, we are going to see that this is a material data table. So in order to populate it with some data coming from the server, we are going to need a data source. In this case, a custom data source, lessons data source. Let's see how the data source is integrated with the material data table. So if we switch here to our template, we are going to see that a data source property is being filled in. So we need to pass to the material data table a data source that implements a given interface, and that data source is going to provide to the data table an observable of data. The data table is going to subscribe to that observable and it's going to receive the data that it needs to display via that observable. So we're going to have a look here at the lessons data source file that we have here, which contains an initial skeleton implementation of our custom data source. This is so that we can focus on the implementation of the interaction with the store. This custom data source is implementing the data source interface, and it's a data source of lesson, meaning that the data that it emits is an array of lesson objects. The most important method of our data source is the connect method. We won't be calling the connect method directly. Instead, this connect method is called by the material data table component whenever it receives here the data source in its input property. Connect is then going to return an observable of lessons array, and the data table is going to subscribe to this observable. So it's via this observable that we are returning here that the material data table is going to receive its data. In order to make it really simple to implement this observable, we are going to be defining here a subject that is going to be kept private to the data source class, and that subject is going to be used to emit new values for this observable. Whenever we load a new page of data, we simply have to emit a new value using lesson subject.next, and then we pass in the array of lessons that we want to transmit to the data table, and the data table is going to receive it. We have here a method called load lessons that is going to be called by our component to load new pages of lessons. This already gives us a good idea of how the data source works and how it interacts with our material data table. So let's go ahead and switch to our component and let's load the first page of data. The first thing that we're going to need here is to instantiate the lessons data source. Now we already know that the lessons data source is going to fetch its data that is going to be displayed here from the store and not from the backend. So we already know that the lessons data source is going to need the store. Let's then go ahead and inject the store here in the constructor. So the store, as usual, is going to be defined as a store of application state. Once we have the store injected here, we can pass it to the lessons data source via its constructor. So let's go ahead and instantiate this property here. We are going to say that this.dataSource is equal to a new instance of the lessons data source class. And we're going to pass in here the store in its constructor. Let's now add the store to the constructor here of our lessons data source class. So with this, the store is here available to all methods of this class, including the load lessons method. Let's now go back to our course component and see what arguments do we need here to pass to load lessons. First, we're going to add here the this keyword in order to be able to pass the store to the data source. Now, after initializing the data source, we are going to go ahead and load the first page of data. So we are going to start by defining here what page of data do we need. We are going to define here a local variable called initial page, which is going to be of type page query. First, we are going to fill in page index with 0, meaning that we want the first page, and then we're going to define here the page size that we are going to define as being free. This is so that we can fit in here a page in the small amount of space that we have here on the screen. Now that we have defined the page that we want to load, let's go ahead and load it by calling the data source. So we are going to be calling here the load lessons method, and let's see what arguments do we need here. First, we need to specify the course ID for the course for which we want to load some lessons. So we're going to pass in here as the first argument the course ID. The next argument that we need to specify is what page of lessons do we need. So in this case, it's the initial page. Let's now go ahead and fill in these arguments here in the load lessons method. So the first argument is going to be the course ID, which is of type number. The second argument is going to be the page, which is of type page query. What we're going to do next is we are going to implement the load lessons method. So this method is going to query the store for this page of lessons, and it's going to return that to the data table using the lesson subject. In order to query the store, we are going to be needing a selector as usual. Let's then write our lessons page selector. This is coming right up in the next lesson.